It's almost like we're looking at the outcome. We're like, I want the outcome.
Yes.
I don't want all this stuff. We do this with athletes too, right? Like I want the gold medal. I don't want the 5 a.m. practices 7 days a week. I don't want the.
Yeah. I think it was Naval who said, you can't just pick and choose bits of someone's life and say, I want his physique and her net worth, and I want his house. And like you have to take the whole package. And a lot of the great things in anyone's life, there's a cost that came with that, whether it's their career success that they had to put into it. You know, there's stories that Bill Gates worked, I think it was 25 years without ever taking a single day off. And most of the days he's working, it would be like he came home at midnight and crashed on the couch for 4 hours and then went back to work. I'm so grateful that he exists, but I would not want that for myself. That's not my definition of the life that I would want. Our friend David Senra, who runs the podcast Founders, has profiled, I think now, probably 350 founders over time. And he says, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I'm pretty sure he said, the only founder that he has ever read their biography and thought, I want his life, is Ed Thorpe. And everybody else that he reads it, I think he comes to the same conclusion that I do. I'm glad they exist. I would never want to live their life. Because there's always a hidden cost that when you dig into it, you're like, yes, he was very successful because he sacrificed a million things that would be that are very important to you and I.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Like you're incredibly successful. Your books have sold well over 5 million copies now. The inbound to you for requests of your time, your speaking, your presence, hop on the phone for 15 minutes must be off the charts. How do you keep your surface area small or keep doing the things that you want to do?
Well, the only way to manage that is to say no to virtually everyone. And that sucks for me for 2 reasons. A, I don't have any assistant. I'm personally saying no to them. I don't pawn it off to anyone else. And I don't like making people sad. When you blow someone off or even respectfully say no, they're going to be hurt a little bit. I vividly remember, I'm not going to say who, but names that you and people would know, that I reached out to early in my career and said, hey, can I please pick your brain for 15 minutes? And they said no. And I was hurt. I still remember it. Yeah. I still remember the emails. I remember reaching out to a couple of authors probably 15 years ago and saying, my name is Morgan. I'm an aspiring author. I'm trying to do this. I so admire you. Can I please ask you, just 10 minutes on the phone? And some of them didn't respond. And I still remember that. So if anyone who remembers that gets in that same position themselves where they have to say no to a lot of people, it sucks. But there's no other way to handle it. There's no other way to manage it.
It seems like success, and we've talked about this before, but success sows the seeds of its own destruction. How do you think about that? In what ways does it do it?
The biggest is just that it allows you to become lazy, and it's going to degrade the thing that made you great. What made you, like literally you, successful is probably like some degree of like waking up and feeling inadequate. Just waking up and being like, I know I'm capable of doing more than I've achieved already, and I got to go do it. And it's pretty common, like whether that was driven by a lack of self-esteem, like whatever it was, you're waking up and you're like, I need to achieve more than I have today. And once you have achieved some level, it's easy to be like, well, I've already done that. And then the thing that made you successful, that drive you had, is diminished. You see this in companies and in people. And the other thing that's really powerful is when you are lower on the totem pole, it's easier for everyone around you to tell you what you're doing wrong. And the higher you gain, particularly when you get up to the very high levels, no one wants to tell you doing wrong because you're probably paying those people to be surrounded, to surround you with advice. And they don't want to tell the emperor he has no clothes. That happens to lots of people, lots of companies and whatnot. The thing that made you great is degraded the more successful that you become. And some people fight this very well, but a lot of people don't. It's a tough thing. I think the laziness aspect of it, of once you become more financially independent, you're not driven. For most of my career, I was writing because that was how I fed my children. Like I have to do this. Yes, I love it. Yes, I enjoy it, but I absolutely have to do this. Once you get to a point where it's like, look, I still love to do this, but I don't have to do it anymore. Is my motivation lower than it used to? I think the answer is yes. Like I don't like to admit that, but I think the answer is yes. Now I'm still as motivated. I'm still very motivated to keep writing because I love doing it. And I think there's a part of it that I enjoy more now that I'm not doing it to feed my children. I'm doing it because I love the art of writing rather than just the business of writing. But people's motivations change over time. Now, part of that is great. I don't want to be 60 years old and having to work to feed myself this week, but you shouldn't pretend that it's going to not impact the thing that made you great.
I want to come to writing later on. I got a lot of questions about your process around that. But before we get there, what is risk?
You can have a million different definitions of risk. I think broadly, it's anything that's going to prevent you from achieving the goals that you want. That's a very basic answer, but I think that's what it is. And the reason that's important is because take volatility in the stock market. Is that risk? Well, it could be. If you're a day trader, then yes. If the market goes down tomorrow, that's a risk for you. If you're going to retire in 50 years, it's not whatsoever. So just defining it in personal terms is, I think, the most important. But a lot of finance is not that. They define risk as volatility, whatever it might be, recessions, all these different things. But it's a very personal answer. What is risky for me might not be for you, and vice versa. And this is what gets back to most financial debates are people with different time horizons talking over each other. There's a quote that I love that is, personal finance is more personal than it is finance. That is really important for everyone. You and I should not pretend that risk for Renaissance technologies is going to be the same for you and I within our personal households. Like completely and utterly different. So anything that pulls you away from whatever goals you personally have is what I would define as risk.
If you had to break down the skill differences between accumulating money, keeping money, and spending money, how would you do that?
I've often defined it as like getting rich and staying rich are completely different skills. And there's not that many people who are equally skilled in getting rich versus staying rich. There's, a sliver of society that's very good at getting rich that has no ability to stay rich. And there's some people who are very good at holding on to money, but much less talented at building it and growing it over time. When you have both skills combined, it's a very special thing. Buffett is obviously that. Bill Gates is that. There's a handful of people who are extremely good at getting rich and have stayed rich very well. The example that I always use is Bill Gates when he started Microsoft. Took the most audacious entrepreneurial swing that maybe anyone's ever taken of saying every desk in the world needs a computer on this. And he's saying this in 1974, whatever it was. Crazy amount of risk, crazy bold vision. At the same time, he said that he always wanted Microsoft to have enough cash in the bank to make payroll for 1 year with no revenue, which is the most conservative, pessimistic way to run a business. So he's like very risk-taking and very conservative, paranoid at the same time. Very good at getting rich, very good at staying rich at the same time. It's very unique to have both of those acting at the same time. And I think at the individual level, you can have it too. My net worth, you'd say, is very barbelled. Like a lot of cash, that's the paranoid conservative side, and stocks that I hope to hold for 50 years. That's like incredibly audacious that this is actually going to work out over the next half century. And I don't think that's any contradiction. It's just trying to get both of the skills of getting rich and staying rich work at the same time.
Speaking of staying rich, one of the stories we talked about last night was the Vanderbilts and how they basically blew a $400 billion fortune. What happened?
If you look at all of the robber baron, very wealthy families, the Carnegies, the JP Morgans, the Fords, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, I think virtually all of them did well or did a decent job at managing that dynastic money, except the Vanderbilts. The Vanderbilts completely and utterly botched it. The stat is, when Cornelius Vanderbilt died, his net worth, adjusted for inflation, because he died in the 1800s, was the equivalent of $400 billion. And in 3 generations, there was nothing left, which is an astounding thing to think about. And in between there sat 3 generations who just blew money in the dumbest ways you can imagine. And the reason you could say it was dumb is because I don't think any of them were happy. I think they were pretty much all miserable. If you dig into the biographies of these 3 generations, a lot of the other robber baron families taught their children, taught their heirs to run the business or to become good philanthropists, whatever it was. The Vanderbilts effectively told their heirs, your job, your sole purpose on this planet is to spend more money than anyone else. And so they did it. They built the biggest houses that were so big they didn't even want to live in them because they were too big. They threw parties that were so extravagant they were just burdens on themselves. It's like they were used, like their sole financial metric is, can you spend more money than the other socialite? And they were all miserable for it. And the story that a lot of people know now is that the first Vanderbilt heir to not get any money, when all the money was exhausted, the first heir where there was nothing left was Anderson Cooper of CNN. His mother was a woman named Gloria Vanderbilt. She got the last trust fund in the family. And Cooper is not only the most successful Vanderbilt heir in like 180 years, he's probably the happiest. And he's talked about this, that money that you are given, that you inherit, can be a burden to your ambition, a burden to your identity of building a name for yourself. And he was kind of the first Vanderbilt heir who was like relieved of the burden of having to carry on this thing of like, I'm a socialite, I'm a Vanderbilt. And he's just like, I gotta build my own name and my own career. And I'm sure because his mother was Gloria Vanderbilt, there were doors open to him that would not be open to anyone else. But he pretty much had to build it for himself for the first time in 150 years.
Do you believe that money should be able to pass between parents and kids?
Well, able, sure, it's your decision. But there are obviously downsides. And I'm sure, I hope it's a long time from now, that I'll leave my kids some money, not a lot. I love the Buffett quote where he says, leave your kids enough money so that they can do anything, but not so much money that they can do nothing. And that I think is really important. I want to use whatever money I've saved to give my kids the best opportunity of building the life that they want, but not so much money that they are forced to live the life that I want for them. I've met some families who are very wealthy, and wealth becomes like a personality burden of, because I inherited this much money, my job is to just be an heir of my grandfather, an heir of my parents, rather than finding out who I am and discovering who I am for myself. That's true at like the very high levels, but you don't want the wealth that you pass your kids to burden them into a lifestyle that they don't want for themselves. You just want to be like, here's enough money so that you can have the leverage and the tools to find out who you want to be and live the life that you want, but not so much that it's going to burden you into like forcing you into a direction that you don't want to be.
It's almost like there's a geometric progression of surface area here, where the more houses you acquire, the more staff you need. The more staff you need, the more managers you have. The more managers, I was talking to Sam Zell. We were supposed to record a podcast. It never happened because he unfortunately passed away. But when I was talking to him, he just wanted 2 houses, right? He didn't want 10 houses. He didn't want all of these things. He's like, I can just rent them. I don't want the hassle. I don't want the burden that comes with that. Do you think that we lose sight of that? And then there's sort of like a natural entropy to wealth, right? Like it starts to expand.
Yeah.
And you actually have to apply a lot of energy to keep it small.
Yeah. It's obviously not the case that the more money you have, the less happy you're going to be. That's obviously wrong. But I think if you have more money, you can have a more complicated life. And complication can lead to a lot of unhappiness. That's definitely true. And I think this is mostly true for people who are like middle wealth. If you're like extreme upper wealth, you can just hire out every decision. People can take care of it for you. It's people who have enough money to buy a second home, but they have to manage it themselves. That's when things get like really complicated in your life. Many years ago, I did this consulting session with a group of NBA rookies. Some of them were 19, 20 years old, and they're now making millions. And a lot of them grew up in like inner city poverty. They grew up very, very poor. And when they are teenagers, they sign contracts for millions of dollars. It's like such a stark movement for them. And the purpose of this conversation was to talk about money, to try to prevent the very well-known path of athletes going bankrupt. A very significant percentage of these people who make millions of dollars are bankrupt by the time they're 30. So like, how do we prevent that? And one of these athletes, who was, I think he was 19, said something that I thought was so profound and wise. He said, when you grow up in inner city poverty and then you make millions of dollars when you're still young, that's not just your money. Mm-hmm. That is mom's money. That is brother's money. That is cousin's money. That is neighbor's money. You can't just tell everyone back at home, good luck to y'all. I got my money. I'm going to go live in the mansion. You stay in this level of poverty. You can't do that. And he said the reason so many athletes go bankrupt is not because they bought themselves a mansion. It's because they bought their 5th cousin a house and they felt so much pressure to do it that they had this like social burden that came with the money. And I think at many different levels, that's an extreme example, but at a lot of levels, there is social debt that comes with money. So if you, at every level of net worth, like if your net worth grows by $1, with that comes a couple pennies maybe of like social debt, where you are like incentivized or like pushed towards to increase your lifestyle or to take care of other people in ways that might be great, but might be a burden, might be a debt that comes with it. And at some point, I think that social debt explodes. I mean, people who are worth, 50 or $100 billion, obviously there's not that many of them, but their social debt to use that money wisely and to donate that money wisely is off the charts. It's enormous, the pressure that they have to use that money well, to not end up like the Vanderbilts. How much pressure does Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates have to donate their money effectively? And no matter what they do, no matter what causes they give to, people are going to say, well, that's not a worthy cause. This was more worthy than that. Enormous amount of like invisible social debt that comes with that.
Talk to me more about that. Like, I love that concept. I don't want to talk about the extremes where like Bezos and Musk and that, but the social debt, like almost like you go to a wedding and you have to give more because you have more. Is that what
or you go out to, if your friends know that you have money, you go out to dinner, you're forced to pay kind of thing. Or like, oh, I heard this guy just got a huge bonus last year. Let's see what he gets me for Christmas kind of thing. There's a lot of that comes with it. And of course, it's a good problem to have. It's you should not have sympathy for people who made so much money that they now have social debt. Like, boohoo, you deal with it. But it's a real thing. And a lot of it is just the incentive on yourself or within your own family to be like, oh, we have more money now. I guess we should buy more stuff. It's like this pressure to do something that you may or may not actually want. One other like weird oddball story that I've thought about here. On the Amtrak train from Washington, D.C. to Boston is where it goes. There is always a quiet car. It's one section of the train where you're supposed to be completely quiet if you want to get some work done or whatnot. And always what happens, you go there for peace and serenity. But everyone on the quiet car is so anxious and upset because on the quiet car, if someone so much as whispers, or if your phone accidentally goes off, people lose their minds because they have this expectation that it's going to be completely quiet. And so the slightest little sound sets them off. And like the irony is you go there for serenity, but you're just so angry while you're there because if anyone's making any noise, it drives you crazy. And it's this thing of just like, if your expectations shift, then the littlest thing can make you upset. So like when you go to the quiet car, yes, it is quieter, but you also have this like sound debt that comes with it, you could say, this invisible sound debt that is a liability now. And I think it's so true with money as well, that the more money you gain, the more pressure you have to live a better life that may or may not actually make you happier. Will Smith, the actor, said that when he was poor and depressed, he could tell himself, if only I had more money, all my problems would go away.
Right.
And then when he became rich and he was still depressed, he couldn't say that anymore. He was still depressed, but he was like, I can't say that if I had more money, I would be happier because I already have more money than I could ever spend. So he said what happened when he became rich is it just removed the hope that he had. When he was poor, he had this hope like, oh, I got to make more money and then I'll be okay. When he's rich, it's like he lost all the hope. He's still depressed. Like it's very inspiring to think if I have more money, my problems will go away. But then once you have that money and you realize that you still have just as many problems, maybe even more problems than you had before, that could be a tough thing for people to wrap their heads around.
We were talking about that a little bit last night in the sense of people who have money can't really talk about money either because they have all the same problems that everybody else has, but they don't feel like they can openly converse about it.
Yeah.
Because it's like boo-hoo.
And it's true. Like they are boohoo problems. There are much bigger problems in the world. If you are, can't afford health insurance, you're homeless, whatever. There are much, much bigger problems. But first world problems are real problems in people's heads. And you're right that they're, by and large, can't talk about them. It's very interesting when you get together a group of wealthy people into a room where they can all start, like in that safety zone, they can talk about their problems and they all have the same problems.
Yeah.
How do I not spoil my kids? How do I do this? Things that they can't talk about with anyone else in their life because those problems are so different from the other like very real material health living problems. But there are lots of things that are very difficult to figure out when you have a lot of money or even just a modest amount of money that you can't talk about even with some of your closest friends.
Yeah.
I'm sure you do have friends who have less money than you and I do.
Yeah.
And you can talk about, with those friends, you can talk about anything else in life.
Yeah.
Problems with your marriage, problems with your health, whatever it might be. And there's all these other things that you're like, I can't talk about the things that are actually giving me anxiety right now.
It seems like the meta skill to think about right now throughout this conversation is how do we learn to manage our expectations?
This is how we started the podcast. I don't want my expectations to never move. I want them to just grow a little bit slower than my wealth over time. I want it so that in 50 years, I hope that I'm living a better material life to some degree. I just want that level to not exceed my net worth over time. Once your aspirations exceed the growth of your wealth, that's when people they take too much risk. They go into debt, whatever it might be.
You've hung around, spent time with a lot of wealthy families, either giving talks or individually. The problems are the same. How do they deal with not raising spoiled children? What have you learned from that?
I'd say most of them, how do they deal with not raising spoiled children is they don't deal with it well. It's a very hard thing to do. I had a conversation recently with a guy who was, his father is a billionaire and they've lived like billionaires his entire life. He's roughly our age and he's a very down to earth, grounded, polite guy. And so I asked him, like, how did you grow up in private jets and mansions and not become a spoiled little prick? Because he's such a nice guy. And he said, despite having that much money and living like a billionaire, his parents never told him that because we have more money, we're better than anyone else. And they told him quite the opposite. And he said something I thought was really important. He said, the reason that so many kids grow up spoiled is because their parents are obsessed with money. That's why the parents are rich, is because they're obsessed with money. But it naturally grows into this thing of like, you are better than other people if you have more money. And if people have less money than us, then we're not, they are not equal to us. And it's so basic and almost cliche, but if you are very wealthy, but you're still teaching your kids the good values, that will stick with them. And the opposite is true too. If you raise your kids, even if you have a lower income, but you raise them with an obsession with money, to like, that's the scorecard of measuring other people. It's like, well, what's your net worth? What's your salary? That's what I'm going to measure you by and rank you by. That's when you get spoiled little jerks as children.
How do you and Gretchen talk to your kids about money?
Well, our kids are 4 and 8, so not that much yet. The other thing that I've noticed, I'm sure it's the same for you and other people who have multiple children, is that my kids could not be more different in their personalities.
Totally.
And of course, they're raised by the same parents. They shared half their DNA. Like it's the same house, the same rules, the same upbringing, and they're utterly different people. So you can't create one philosophy, one parenting philosophy for that. The other thing is, even if I know my children today, I don't know who they're going to be when they're adults. Does my daughter want to be a partner at Goldman Sachs? Does she want to work for Greenpeace? Does she want to be a kindergarten teacher? You have no idea what they're going to do. And the different, rules are going to be different for them. I also think that what's true is that the more you try to tell your kids, this is what you should do, the more they're going to rebel against that, particularly when they're teenagers. But the more that you can just lead by example, they are going to pick up on it. You don't need to sit your kids down and say, let me teach you about money. And in fact, if you do that, most kids are going to yawn and say, I'm not interested in this. But they are definitely paying attention to every time you say, we can't afford this. They're making a mental note of it. Every time you say that's too expensive, every time you say, I value this, I don't value that, they're forming a model in their head that's going to stick with them forever. And so I think just leading by example with them is what we try to do, rather than trying to say, this is what I want to teach you. These are the values I want to instill. Back to my own parents. I don't think they ever sat me or my siblings down and said, let me teach you about money. But I learned profound money lessons for them by just observing when I was 8 years old.
Well, let's invert it. We can go from parenting and then maybe to money broader, but like, what lesson don't you want your kids to learn about money? What would be the worst thing that they could take away from you about money?
Don't think that all poverty is due to laziness, and don't think that all wealth is due to hard work. It's not. If you are just ranking people by their net worth and ranking their value by their net worth, that's probably the most dangerous thing you could do with money. It's the most profoundly wrong takeaway from money. And yes, a lot of wealthy people earned it, of course, and a lot of wealthy people or a lot of poor people made some very bad decisions. But once you just use it as a yardstick to measure people's value by, you're making a huge mistake. There are a lot of wealthy people who I cannot stand, and some of my best friends don't make that much money. And I think you can only have that in your life if you divorce someone's salary and net worth from their personal worth in life.
What else? Keep going.
I think what's interesting, I don't know if this is a lesson, but what's interesting is that if you ask most parents, what do you want for your kids? Almost every parent will say, I just want them to be happy. I just want to raise happy kids. And then if you said, do you want your kids to be rich and successful? You'd be like, well, sure, but I just want them to be happy. I just want them to be happy. So I think figuring out how to use money as a tool to make you happier rather than just a tool to pile on to become wealthier is really important. That there are for sure people who earn 30 grand per year that are so much happier than people who earn $3 million per year. And understanding that value of money, I think, is really important. Like, what can money do to make you happier? Because there's no other purpose. There's nothing else that you should even think about other than that.
What do you think is the biggest risk to capitalism?
I think it's always going to be the case. It is inevitable, and it is actually ideal that there is some level of inequality in the world. It's not only inevitable, it's ideal. The opposite of that is a nightmare. But it's also the case that you do not want a third of society waking up every morning and saying, this doesn't work for me. This system doesn't work for me. So once you get to some critical level, I don't know, maybe it's not 30%, whatever it is, but if enough people wake up in the morning and say, this sucks, this system doesn't work, then it's going to reverse itself. And there's a very long history of that. So the balance of you want inequality, because people's skills are unequal. You want that to be the case, but there is some barrier at which it starts to reverse itself. And it becomes a pitchforks in the streets kind of scenario. That reverts. Now, in the history of the United States, that's happened several times. The 1920s and the Great Depression. I've been thinking what we've dealt with in the last couple of years. There's always a pendulum between labor and capital, workers and investors, and it kind of swings back and forth of who's taking the lion's share of the spoils in this economy. In the 1920s, it was capital. From the 50s to 70s, it was labor. And since then, it's been capital. And it kind of shifts back and forth. Now, just in the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a huge growth. The segment of society whose incomes have grown the most tends to be the lower incomes. We're still kind of attached to this narrative of the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. But in the last couple of years, it has kind of flipped around, at least to a degree that we haven't seen in a very long time. Is that the pendulum shifting towards another, 30-year trend? Maybe, I have no idea. But that pendulum is always there to kind of keep itself in check. And I think if it gets too extreme, you can get very extreme outcomes. We don't remember this now, but in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, the words dictator and authoritarian and even fascism were not the dirty words that they are today. A lot of people during that era, it was not uncommon for people to say capitalism and even having a big democracy just doesn't work. The Great Depression in their minds proved that it didn't work. And people's push to say, hey, look at all these countries in Europe that are going towards fascism. Maybe we should try that because this didn't work. I think that's the danger when you get too unequal in society, is that too many other people can be tempted to saying, that didn't work, let's try something even more extreme.
It's almost like I feel like I don't have opportunity. And
Yes.
the minute I feel like I don't have opportunity, and it's almost like we want equal opportunity and we're okay with unequal outcomes.
Yeah. It's a really tough thing. And I would not, I think you and I, if we felt that we were trapped, that there's no way, no matter how hard we work, if we felt, whether it's true or not, that we were trapped in a low income job, you and I would be prone to some extreme views too.
Oh, totally.
There's a saying I love that it was from a Russian poet who spent a lot of time in the Gulag. And he says, man becomes a beast in 2 weeks. If you have 2 weeks of deprivation, 2 weeks without food, 2 weeks in solitary confinement, a refined, kind, polite person becomes an animal. So like if you put someone in an extreme scenario, they're going to be prone to extreme views, extreme outcomes.
Do you think most adults understand compounding?
I think it's not intuitive to virtually anyone. Michael Badnick, a good friend of mine, has a saying that's so simple, but I think sums this up the best. He said, if I asked you, what is 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8? You can figure that in your head in 5 seconds. If I said, what is 8 times 8 times 8 times 8 times 8? Even if you're a math genius, you're like, I don't know. It's such a huge number. Like I have no idea what it is. basic linear math is very intuitive, very easy. Compounding math is just, it's so unintuitive for even people who understand it. And it's everywhere. Compounding is not just in your bank account, your brokerage account. There's compounding in nature. There's compounding for social trends. And it's easy to underestimate how big something can become because compounding is so counterintuitive. You see this with COVID, which was compound interest at its prime. Like this virus that in the early days is, doubling every day, whatever it would be. And that's how you go from, 3 people are infected in March of 2020 to today. Like, I don't know anyone who's not had COVID. That's how it goes from literally 3 people to the entire world in the blink of an eye when it's doubling that quickly.
How would you explain it to kids or adults? Like, what is the best way to teach people the power of compounding? It's like the one formula. I tell my kids this when they're in math and they're learning this in sort of grade 8, grade 9. They learn about compounding. And I'm like, your teacher's never going to tell you this, but this is the most important formula you're probably going to learn in your math class.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm making this up right now. I've not thought about this. I don't know how I would explain it, but just growth fuels more growth. It's like the more you grow, the more fuel you have for more growth. That's not a very good explanation for it, but that's the thing to wrap your head around is like, it's not what you start with. It's just like how long you're doing it for.
And it's not even the growth, it's the duration that matters.
Yes. So I said this earlier, how I think about my own investing philosophy. If I can be average for an above average period of time, that leads to a way above average result. It's not about like, what are the returns that I can earn this year? If I can earn 8% returns for 50 years, the results are ridiculous. The results are absurd. And so maximizing the variable that matters, which is time and endurance, all compounding is effectively is returns to the power of time. And so if you understand math, the exponent there is what's doing all the heavy lifting, like maximize for that. But where is all of the effort in the investing industry? It's in the smaller number. It's in returns. How do I increase my returns this year? But I think when you understand, like, no, all the power, all the wealth, all the leverage is in the endurance, just focus on that before you think about anything else.
That's a really powerful way to think about it. Let's switch gears and talk about reading and writing. How do you select what you read?
I heard this idea, I think it was from Patrick O'Shaughnessy many years ago, who said, you want a wide funnel and a tight filter. I will start reading any book on any topic that looks even mildly interesting to me, but I will slam it shut without mercy and move on to something else if it's not working for me. A lot of the reason that people don't like read, why people don't read as much as they should, or if they say, I'm not a big reader, a lot of the reason is because they feel like morally that they need to finish every book that they start. And we realize that the majority of books, there's 4 million books for sale on Amazon. I bet 3.9 million of those are not meant for you or for me. They're meant for other people, but they just don't work for what we want out of them. And if you force yourself to finish every book you start, of course, it's going to be a miserable experience. But when you are willing to try anything, but have a filter that just has no mercy to move on if you don't like it, that's when you find the great books. Because if you only stick to books that you know you're going to like about topics that you're interested in, you are missing so many other topics out there that you don't even know that you would like. You have to try a million different things, but then cut it off very quickly if you don't like it. So that's how I try to read. If it's even slightly interesting, if someone has said, oh, this is a good, I will start reading it. By the way, Kindle samples are free. You have no excuse to not try any book. And then just mercilessly cut it off if it's not working for you.
I find this really interesting because with my oldest who reads a ton, I just put books on his nightstand, and some of them I think he'll like, some of them I don't think he'll like, and he'll pick them up. And he read like an immune system textbook last year, and loved it.
Yes, I think there's a lot of like that. If you ask me right now, would I like to read a book on the immune system? I say I don't know, not really. But there are so many topics like that over the years that I never would have thought that I would like. That I start reading, I'm like, this is incredible. Or it's working for me in that moment.
Right.
It's a missing puzzle piece in that moment. There are a couple books that have always been on my go-to books that I recommend to other people. Oh, this is one of my favorite books of all time. A couple of those books I went back and reread, and I'm like, they're really not that good. But at the time that I read them, it was a missing puzzle piece. That it was like perfect for me in that moment.
Yeah.
Even if when I read it now, I'm like, this book's kind of, it's very basic, not that well written. And so I think that missing puzzle piece is true for a lot of people. And that's why, like, you need to read a lot of books, because what other people think are good may or may not be the book that you need at that moment.
Are you a Kindle reader mostly?
I'd go back and forth. I'm in a Kindle kick right now. And I've been in physical books before. What I love about Kindle is it's so easy to highlight and go back and search, which for me as a writer is really important. When I'm writing, I'm like, oh, what was that quote from this book? I need to go find that. Really hard to do that in a physical book. Whereas Kindle, it's just so easy.
Do you take them out of the Kindle or just leave the highlights on the Kindle? Or
I use the Readwise app. And so everything that I highlight, whether it's in a blog post or on Twitter, or it goes all into that. David Senra is the one who said his Readwise feed of all of his highlights is his smart Twitter feed.
Yeah.
Twitter can be filled with so much garbage and noise, but Readwise, you can flick through. I think David Senra said he has like 28,000 highlights, and he can sit there and scroll it of these like amazing quotes and anecdotes that he's highlighted over the years.
Are there passages that stick with you or haunt you that you've read that you can't stop thinking about?
This might seem a weird one, but because I'm a writer too, as you are, I'm a sucker for just a well-crafted phrase. But there was one, I forget who wrote this. I'm sorry, I can't tell you who wrote this, but it was a book about D-Day. Mm-hmm. And it was talking about this one group, this one company of soldiers on D-Day, of whom many of them died. And the passage was, all of them were prepared to die that day, and all of them did die that day. Hmm. And that was something, it's such a beautifully crafted sentence, and it's also just haunting in its own way. I'm such a sucker for that. It's not like, I always say the best story wins. You could phrase that fact that they all died a million different ways, but how whoever the author was phrased that always really stuck with me.
Why do you think the best story wins? What's behind that?
What we're trying to do when we read a lot of times is just contextualize whatever fact or story that was within our own lives. And it's much easier to contextualize a story than a statistic, because there's a human element to a good story. And it's just so much easier to remember and stick with you. I don't remember any of the formulas that I was forced to memorize in school, forced to memorize the night before the test. I don't remember a single one. But every good story that I was told, some of them when I was 6 years old, I still remember. So because it's just so much easier to remember a story than a statistic, and it's easier to contextualize it within your own life, and because there's so much emotion embedded in it, stories are like leverage for good statistics. If you just like, there's some statistic, like I just said, if I said, first platoon of Company E all died on D-Day, that's a statistic. But if you phrase that, if you put a name or a face to it, it becomes a completely different thing. I always use the example of Ken Burns, who makes the best documentaries about U.S. history. And the vast majority of what is in his documentaries are already known. A documentary about the Civil War or World War II, you know how it ends, you know what happened. There's not that much new in there, but he is a better storyteller than I think any historian has ever been in history. He can tell a story about the Civil War that will literally bring you to tears, even if you know what happened. You knew what happened, but when you hear the story and see the face and hear the music in the documentary, it will literally bring you to tears. And Ken Burns has talked about how important music is in his documentaries, the background music. And he said that he will literally edit the script so that when the narrator says a specific emotional word, it matches up with a beat in the background music, so that the emotion and the music is literally aligned like that. No other historian's doing that. No other historian does that. And that's why he can create, he has the leverage by talking about the Civil War that no other of the historians who are writing about the Civil War can recreate.
Take a few seconds and think about how you would teach me to tell a better story. You're one of the best storytellers of our generation. Teach me how to tell a story like Morgan Housel.
I think it's two things. One is write for an audience of one, which is yourself. Don't think about other people. Don't think about who's going to read this. Don't ask yourself, how is the reader going to interpret the sentence? Write a sentence that moves you, that makes you, when you read it, you're like, ooh, I like that, without thinking about anyone else. I think once you start thinking about who is my audience and what are they going to like, you start to pander. And you start to like perform for them in a way that is very hard to like create a good emotional story about. Just write for yourself. The other is, don't forget how impatient everyone is. So this is a sense where maybe you are thinking about the reader, but everyone is so impatient when they're reading that you just always have to ask yourself, what is the point that I'm trying to make? Make that point and get the hell out of people's way and move on to another point. And most storytelling, you lose it once you lose the reader. Mark Twain he said at one point that when he would edit his work, he would read it aloud to his family. He would read the story aloud. And when he saw them getting bored, he would make a note. All right, cut that part. They're clearly dozing off here. And when he would see their eyes bug up, he'd be like, oh, this is a good thing. This is a good part. And I think Mark Twain was the one who said, leave out the parts that readers tend to skip. That's the key to good writing. Leave out the parts that people tend to skip. I think that's important to keep in mind too, is just write for yourself in a way that you like and get to the point and get out of people's way after that.
How did you learn to write? You didn't even go to high school.
Right. When I was at the Motley Fool for 10 years, that was a 10-year period where I was sometimes writing 3 posts per day, 3 articles per day, doing that every day for almost a decade. I wrote thousands and thousands of blog posts. And when you write online, people are merciless about the feedback they give you. The readers in the comment sections or on Twitter will tell you in no uncertain terms, this article was shit and you did a terrible job. Or they'll say, this was really good. I really enjoyed it. So having that level of constant feedback and doing that thousands of times over a decade will turn anyone into a much better writer than they were when they started. So that was really what it was for me. It's a combination of quantity and fierce, unvarnished feedback from readers.
Do you test ideas?
I think in some ways you test ideas in Twitter. And if they work, you can turn those ideas into a blog post. And if the blog post worked, you can turn it into a book idea or a book chapter. That's kind of the natural progression for a lot of these things. And just like it's very true in comedy too, even the best comedians, the world-class comedians, don't necessarily know what's funny until they've tested it. And this is why George Carlin, Chris Rock, Jerry Seinfeld, they test their new jokes in tiny clubs. Because even Chris Rock does not know what's funny until they've tested it, until he's tested it. And I think it's true for writers as well. I've had a lot of experience with, I'll write a blog post and I'm like, this is good. This is some of my best work. And it flops. No one else likes it. And the opposite is true too. The biggest, most popular blog posts I've ever written were always ones where when I was writing it, I was like, nah, I don't think this is any good. This is so obvious. It's so boring. It's too personal. No one else is going to care about this. That does well. So even after doing this for so many years, I don't know if my ability to find a topic and say like, ooh, that's going to turn into a good post is really that good, which is why you kind of have to test ideas over time.
It's so interesting because podcasts are like that too. I'll record an episode and I'll be like, oh my God, that was mind blowing. And then, 3 months later, I'll check at the stats and I'll be like, what? And then I'll record a podcast where I'm like, oh, that, I wasn't that engaged. And I look at the stats and it's like off the charts.
Yes. The most popular blog post I've ever written by far, by like an order of magnitude, was a post in 2017 that I wrote about. I grew up with and still have a stutter. And when I was a child and teenager, I could barely speak. It was a very severe stutter when I was a child. And I couldn't really overcome it to where I can talk to you like I do now until I was 30 years old. And so I wrote a post about this trial. It's called Overcoming Your Demons. And it was the most popular post I ever wrote. When I published it, I literally hid it from our blog feed because I was like, no one's going to be interested in this. It was literally hidden. Like the link was out there, but it wasn't even on the feed because I was like, I'm so embarrassed about this that I would just be writing about a personal thing. No one else cares about this. And I really felt that way. And it turned into the most popular thing I ever wrote. It's hard to tell.
Do you think you were scared to put it out there?
Combination of scared. Also, the point of the post was overcoming your demons. That I started with this like profound disability that had such a big impact on my childhood. And I overcame it. And now I speak on stage and do these kind of podcasts. And I felt like it was too look at me, look at me, look at me. I didn't want that. But I think everyone has their demons. You do, I do. Everyone has something where they're like, I've got this problem in my life. And a lot of those are hidden. People don't talk about them because they're embarrassed. They don't want to talk about it. It's too personal. And I think when you are vulnerable and open, people love it because even if you don't stutter, You're like, oh, I have this similar, I have this issue, whatever it would be. And like, thank you for telling me that your life was not is not perfect. Thank you for being open about the struggles that we all have in our lives. I think people like that. But it's a fine balance between that and being too personal, which we've all seen online, or being too braggy, egotistical about like, look how much I overcame. I'm so important. I'm so special. It's a balance
There's
between
almost
those
like
two.
Some people use vulnerability strategically.
Yes, you can tell. There was that viral LinkedIn post a year or two ago it was a founder, and he said, I just had to lay off half my company. And he included a picture of him with like tears running down his face. And people are like, that's terrible. You like, shame on you for just trying to like pull at the heartstrings and say like, oh, I'm so empathetic that I cry when I feel like. It's actually a hard balance between like, why did my stuttering post work? But that picture was just universally panned. It's a balance, but I think it's hard to know where you cross the line there.
I want to come back to comedians for a second. What did they know about telling stories that we should learn from them?
I forget who says this, and this is not a direct quote. I'm paraphrasing it. I'm going to do a much poor job paraphrasing it, but it's like, comedy is a way to show you're smart without being arrogant. Something like that. That's not the quote. I'm doing such a bad job paraphrasing this. But I honestly think that the best comedians are some of the smartest people in society. They understand psychology. George Carlin understood psychology, I think, better than Daniel Kahneman did. That's a bold statement, but I think that is actually true. They are so smart at understanding how the world works, what makes people tick, how people think. But they're doing it in a way where they don't want to just impress you with their intelligence. They want to make you laugh. What could be better than that? And so I'll give you one example. My favorite George Carlin line. He says, have you ever noticed that everyone driving slower than you is an idiot and everyone driving faster than you is a maniac? A, it's funny, but B, it's like, God, that is, if you think about it, that's profound. And understanding like how, like relative views of other people and whatnot. And so I think they're absolute geniuses, but they want to deliver it in a way rather than using big words to say like, look how smart I am. They just want to make you laugh. And they are also, because particularly for like a young comic, if they are not making you laugh quickly, they're going to get booed off stage. So they are the epitome of one-liner, just like so succinct in their delivery, so succinct in their writing, because they don't have the luxury that a lot of authors do of like, let me write a 7,000 word chapter. A comedian on stage is like, if you don't make me laugh every 10 seconds, you're going to get booed off.
It's interesting because you mentioned psychology there. They're keen observers of human nature and psychology. And all we've talked about today, we've talked about it through the lens of money, but it's basically psychology.
Well, I think a lot of things in life fall under this umbrella of how do people make decisions around uncertainty, risk, and lack of information. And that is health, that is politics, that is friendships and marriages, and it's also money. A lot of things fall under the same umbrella. There's a study of like how do people behave. And one of the things I think is important here is that you can learn so much about money by studying and reading fields that have nothing to do with money. I think you can learn more about money by reading about politics, military history, biology, sociology than you will by reading a finance book. Because you're just trying to figure out, how do people make decisions? How do you make decisions and how do other people make decisions? And by and large, you're not going to learn that in an economics textbook, but you will learn about it by reading all of these other fields that have nothing to do with money.
What's your process for writing?
I don't think this is a good advice. So if you're a writer out there, I'm not saying this is the right way to do it. But one of the things that I do that I think is not common is I write. By the time I get to the bottom of a post, it's pretty much the final draft. Not because I can write a final draft in one shot, but because I, by and large, don't move on to the next sentence until I'm satisfied with the previous one. Most writers, most very good writers, will do the opposite. They say your first draft should just be a brain dump, and then you go back and edit. And that's never, for whatever reason, it's never really worked for me. So now, the other thing is I can't sit. I think I get too anxious and jittery sitting for too long. So a lot of times I'll write one sentence. When I'm satisfied with it, I'll get up and like go do the laundry, and I'll come back and write two more sentences, and then I'll go do the dishes or walk my dog or something. So it's very sporadic like that. And I think that contrasts with a lot of writers who are like, oh, I sit down and I can dump 5,000 words on the page and then I go back and edit it. That is probably the best advice to get. Like, that's what you should do. And it's for whatever reason, it's never really worked for me.
Well, you should do what works for you.
I guess that's it.
Yeah.
But most writers that I look up to, I think are much better writers than I, do it the opposite.
How do you hook people? You're one of the best at sort of, you and James Clear, the two people who, the first sentence to your paragraph and sort of like the first part of your story really pulls people in. What do you say? What do you think you do differently?
I think it's a constant reminder of how impatient people are. And if you don't hook them in 5 seconds, you're gone. And I know that because I'm a big reader. And if you don't hook me in 5 seconds, I'm probably gone. Unless you are like an author who I really know, that I will give you a little bit more leeway to be like, okay, like I don't know where your article's going, but I'm gonna stick with you because I like you. If you're not that, you got 5 seconds to catch your attention, or else you're out of there. And I think that is it's easy to overlook that it's not just being succinct, in the core of your article, but it's almost like an inverted pyramid where it's like people are most impatient in the first 2 sentences. And so you would think it'd be the other way around. They would get impatient after they've worked their way through your article and they're getting bored. Like, no, they're most impatient at the top. And there's a lot of data that can be very disheartening for authors. There was a mathematician who looked at Kindle highlight data, and he used highlights as a proxy for how far people make it in a book. And the assumption was when people stop highlighting in Kindle, they probably stopped reading. And he showed that even among best-selling books, the most popular books, the average reader makes like a quarter of the way through.
Yeah.
That's in the bestsellers. That's in the good books. A quarter of the way through and they're done. And so just always reminding yourself how impatient people are. It's just like, what's your point? Like, make your point and get the hell out of people's way. I also think Twitter has made people better writers because the character count limitation has forced people to be like, you have 2 sentences to tell me your idea. And that's all you get. That's actually, I think that's been a great thing overall for making people more succinct.
What makes a good hook?
It could be a lot of things. I could think it could be funny. It could be profound. I think we were talking about this last night about, I forget who said it, that like good writing fits one of the acronyms of like OMG, LOL, like something like that. It should be shocking or funny or profound or scary, something like that. That's just going to invoke
basically an emoji.
Some emotion. Yeah, something like that.
I want to end with 2 questions. So one being, what you can leave everybody some parting wisdom on money and life. What would it be?
I think the most important is to realize how personal it is. And therefore, you really got to be careful taking your cues from other people. You and I, again, same age, same, like going down the list, you and I are very similar people, probably have very different views about what to do with money. And that is fine. Just like you and I might have different views about food. You like this food, I like that. Doesn't mean that you're wrong. Just got different tastes, whatnot. People understand that with food. But there is a common sense with money that there is one right answer for everybody. And so I think you really have to be introspective and look in the mirror and just say, like, what works for myself and my own family? And even if there are holes and flaws and other people disagree with that, if it works well for me, that's as good as you can do. That's an important thing.
And final question, what is success for you?
I think Jim O'Shaughnessy said that his goal as a parent was not to raise good kids. It was to raise good adults. He wanted to be the kind of father that when his kids became adults, they were well balanced. That's different from raising good kids. You want to raise good adults. So that would be a big, like maybe the top box to check in my life, is looking back and being like, my wife and I did our best to raise kids that became good, self-sufficient, well-balanced, polite, happy adults.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Morgan.
Thanks, Shane.